She had fired 11 assistants in 4 months. The last one left his badge on the desk and walked out without saying a word. The one before him cried in the elevator. The one before that sent a resignation email from the parking garage before he even reached his car. Ariana Sterling didn't lose sleep over any of them. At 31, she had already built a technology empire worth $800 million, survived an accident that should have killed her, and learned to operate from a wheelchair with the same precision she once operated from a boardroom stage. She didn't need sympathy. She didn't need easy. What she needed was someone who could keep up. And so far, not a single person in this city had managed to last a full morning. Then Logan Hayes walked in, 37 years old, widowed, father of one. He didn't come because he wanted the challenge. He came because his son needed medicine and the rent was already 3 weeks late. Nobody expected him to survive until lunch. He lasted the entire day. And then he came back. If this story already has your attention, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now settle in, because this one is going to take a while. The morning Logan Hayes walked into the Sterling Technologies building, the security guard at the front desk looked at him the way people look at someone about to make a very bad decision. "Executive floor?" the guard said. That's right. The guard, a stocky man in his 50s named Pete, according to his badge, leaned back in his chair with the slow, deliberate energy of someone who had watched this particular scene play out too many times. He scanned Logan's ID without much urgency. "You the new assistant? Starting today?" Pete nodded, handed the badge back, and said nothing else. But as Logan moved toward the elevator, Pete called after him. "Vending machines are on the 3rd floor, just so you know." Logan turned around. "Why would I need to know that?" "Most people eat something before they go back downstairs." Pete shrugged. "Stress eating, I guess. The ones who don't quit right away." Logan stood there a moment, then pressed the elevator button. "I don't really stress eat." "Good for you," Pete said flatly, already looking back at his monitor. The elevator doors opened. The 32nd floor was quiet in the way that expensive offices are always quiet. Not peaceful, but pressurized, like the air itself was being held in place. The carpet was dark charcoal, the walls a clean off-white with no artwork except a single framed photograph near the reception desk, a skyline shot of the city at dusk, taken from high enough that you couldn't see any of the mess on the ground. The receptionist at the executive desk was named Danny, early 30s, and she looked up from her monitor with an expression that combined professional courtesy with something that was almost apologetic. "You must be Logan Hayes." "I am." She stood and extended her hand. Her grip was firm and practiced. "Danny Reeves. I handle scheduling for the executive floor. I'll be orienting you this morning before you meet Miss Sterling." "Before I meet her," Logan repeated. "She's finishing a call." Danny gestured toward a sleek chair beside the desk. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine." She sat back down and clicked something on her keyboard. There was a pause, the kind that meant she was deciding how much to say. Then, in a quieter voice, "Have you read your contract thoroughly?" "Several times." "And the supplemental conduct guide?" Logan nodded. "The 22-page one or the 8-page addendum?" That got a faint expression from her. Not quite a smile. "Both. Read them both." Another pause. Danny glanced briefly toward the closed glass door at the far end of the corridor. Behind it, through the frosted panel, a figure was visible, seated, still, precise. "I want to be direct with you, Mr. Hayes, not to discourage you, just because I think it's more useful than not saying anything." "Go ahead." "The last person in your role lasted 11 days. The one before her lasted 3. The one before that, a man named Carter with 15 years of executive support experience, lasted a single morning." She folded her hands on the desk. "Ms. Sterling has specific expectations, and she communicates them in a specific way, and not everyone is built to receive that kind of communication without taking it personally." "How do most people take it?" "Personally," Danny said. Logan nodded slowly. He was looking at the frosted glass door. "What happened to Carter, the one who lasted a morning?" Danny hesitated. He asked her once if she needed help opening a door. "That's it?" She told him, and I'm paraphrasing, that if he ever treated her like a liability again, she would have him removed from the building. Danny kept her voice completely neutral. He left before she finished the sentence. Logan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Got it. Do you?" She doesn't want help. She wants competence. Danny looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of recalibration. That's a more useful way to think about it than most people manage. The light above the glass door changed. A small indicator, green to amber. Danny stood immediately. "She's ready, but..." Ariana Sterling's office was large enough that it took a few seconds to locate her when Logan first stepped inside. She was positioned near the window, her back to the door, her wheelchair angled so she could look out at the city below. The office was sparse in the way that communicated control. No clutter, no personal items, no inspirational anything. 2 monitors on the desk, both live. A whiteboard covered in strategic diagrams on one wall. A long conference table near the opposite window with a clean glass surface and 6 chairs, none of them moved an inch out of alignment. She didn't turn around when he came in. Logan stopped a few feet from the door and waited. 15 seconds passed, then 20. Most people would have said something, introduced themselves, cleared their throat, done something to signal that they were there and hoping to be acknowledged. Logan didn't. He just stood with his hands loose at his sides and waited. When she finally turned her wheelchair to face him, he understood immediately why the supplemental conduct guide had spent 3 paragraphs on nonverbal communication. Ariana Sterling had eyes that were doing active, continuous work. She wasn't just looking at him, she was processing him, taking inventory of posture, expression, the way he held his shoulders, what he decided to do with his hands. She looked like someone who'd spent years learning to read rooms because she'd had to become very good at it very quickly. She was younger than he'd expected from her file, though he'd known the age. 31 on paper is different from 31 in person. In person, she looked like someone who had packed about 15 years of difficult decisions into the last decade, and it had settled into her face as something like precision. Not hardness exactly. More like a tool that had been sharpened past the point of being comfortable to hold. "You're Logan Hayes," she said. "I am. You were recommended by 3 separate people in the industry, none of whom I personally trust, so I'm going to be honest. That recommendation works against you." "That's fair," Logan said. She studied him. "Do you know why you're here? And I don't mean the job posting. I need the salary." There was a beat. He could see her recalibrate. She'd been expecting something else. A performance of ambition, maybe. Enthusiasm. Something she'd have to cut through. "That's the first honest answer anyone's given me in an interview in 6 months, she said finally. Her voice was flat. Not unfriendly, but not warm. Transactional. "Sit down." He sat. She pulled a folder from the side of her desk, not handed it to him, just placed it on the surface where he could reach it. "You have a son. Ethan, 8 years old. Asthma. Moderate persistent. Managed. Medical expenses? Ongoing." She nodded like that was expected. "The role pays what was listed. Benefits start 30 days in. I don't do extensions on that timeline." She paused. "Your background is in operations management, not executive support." "That's right." "Why take a lateral move?" "It's not lateral. The salary is higher than anything in my operations track right now, and the role is flexible enough that I can adjust my hours on short notice when Ethan has an episode." Ariana was quiet for a moment. "You researched the hours flexibility." "I read the contract. All of it." Something very small passed across her face. Not impressed. She wasn't the type to show impressed, but noted. "The people who've come before you," she said, "all had one thing in common. They expected you to be grateful for their patience." Her eyes sharpened. "What did you say?" "That's the pattern. Someone takes this job thinking they're doing you a favor by tolerating the difficulty. They come in expecting to be appreciated for not walking out. And when that appreciation doesn't come, they can't figure out why they're still here." Logan kept his voice steady. Not challenging, just matter of fact. "I don't need you to be grateful. I need the job to work. Those are different things." Ariana Sterling looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Your first task starts in 40 minutes. There's a brief on the table. Read it before then." She turned her wheelchair back toward the monitors. Logan reached for the brief. The first task was not complex, but it was fast. Ariana needed 3 documents reformatted, a vendor call rescheduled without notifying the vendor of the reason, and a data summary prepared for a 9:30 internal review, all before 9:15. Logan did it in 22 minutes. He brought the documents to her desk without announcing them, set them in the order she'd asked for, and returned to his workstation. She reviewed them without comment. At 9:15, she called across the office. "The Keen vendor call. Did they confirm the reschedule?" "Not yet. I gave them a 2-hour window. They'll confirm by 11. I needed it before 10. You said by end of morning." "End of morning is before 10. Logan didn't argue. He picked up the phone and called the vendor back, reached someone senior enough to make the call, and had confirmation by 9:23. He relayed it in a single sentence. Ariana said nothing, which, Logan was beginning to understand, was its own kind of answer. By 10:30, she had changed the schedule 3 times. Twice Logan caught it from the shared calendar before she told him. The third time, she announced a change verbally while he was on the phone handling a logistics conflict she'd created from the second schedule change. And when he didn't respond immediately, she said sharply, "Are you listening?" "I'm finishing the Hartwell reroute. 30 seconds. There was silence. He wrapped the call, noted the update, and said, "The 11 o'clock has been moved to 2. I've notified the attendees and flagged that it's a working lunch, so the catering order needs to adjust." Another silence. Then, "The catering order is through facilities. That's not your department." "I know. I called them. It's adjusted." Ariana turned from her screen to look at him across the office. It was the 3rd time she'd done that this morning, turned fully to look, rather than just listening while she kept working. Logan had noticed. He didn't know what it meant exactly, but he noticed. "Don't preempt tasks without telling me," she said. "Understood. Should I have waited for you to tell me to adjust the catering, or would you have preferred I handle it?" She held his gaze for a moment. "Both." "I'll tell you first, next time." She turned back. The first real test came at 11:40, when her phone rang and she looked at the screen and something crossed her face. Very fast, almost hidden, but it was there. Not professional concern, something more personal. She let it ring. Logan looked at his own screen, not at her. The call went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, her phone buzzed with a text. She read it without expression, then set the phone face down on her desk. Her posture shifted, barely, just a tightening in the shoulders, and her typing cadence changed. Logan kept working. At 11:55, she said, without looking up, "Did you order lunch?" "I wasn't sure if you wanted lunch ordered. I always eat at my desk on Tuesdays. Today is Wednesday." There was a pause. "Then I don't eat at my desk on Wednesdays," she said. Her tone was clipped, not apologetic, just correcting the record. "There's a catering menu from the lobby restaurant on the shared drive. I can order from there, or if you have a preference, I can find something else." "The lobby is fine." She didn't look up. "Order for 2. Logan looked at his screen. There was no one else scheduled. He didn't say that. He found the menu and ordered. 20 minutes later, when the food arrived, he set it on the conference table without ceremony. She wheeled herself over without asking for help and opened the containers herself. Logan sat across from her with his own container and ate. For the first 3 minutes, she didn't speak. She was reading something on her tablet while she ate. Logan didn't try to fill the silence. Then she said, "Where did you work before this?" "Cascade Group, operations manager." "Why did you leave?" "They reduced the department. I was collateral." "You were laid off?" "Yes." She set down her fork for a moment. "How long were you unemployed?" 4 months. She nodded. "And before Cascade?" "A logistics startup in Portland. 3 years. Then they got acquired and the new parent company brought in their own people." "Pattern of exits that weren't your choice." "Pattern of exits, yes." She looked at him. "That's not a liability unless you made it one." Logan met her eyes. "I didn't." She picked up her fork again. "The file on my desk when you came in this morning? The red folder. Did you read it?" He had. It had been face down on the table marked internal. Do not distribute. He'd read it while prepping the morning brief because it was within reach and open, and he'd needed context. I read the first 2 pages. And the Reyes contract has a clause that's been modified from the standard template without disclosure. Page 7. The room got very still. Ariana Sterling set her fork down and looked at him. I read it this morning when I was pulling the vendor context, Logan said. I don't know if it's a problem or if it's intentional. I flagged it to myself, but I didn't know if it was my place to raise it. When you say modified, the exclusivity window has been extended by 18 months from the standard 3-year term, and there's a secondary approval clause that routes sign-off through the EVP of partnerships instead of your office. He paused. Your signature is on it, but the modified version postdates the signed copy by 11 days. There it was. Ariana Sterling had gone very still in the way that powerful people go still when they're not processing, when they already know and they're simply deciding something. Who else has touched that folder? She said. I don't know. It was on your desk when I arrived. Who let you into this office before I arrived? Danny, for orientation. She looked at him for a long moment. The folder was in my locked drawer. I took it out this morning. Then I only read what was visible. That's not what I'm asking. Her voice hadn't changed, still flat, still transactional, but underneath it something was tightening. I'm asking you how much you understand about what you just told me. Logan thought about Ethan, about the medical bills on his kitchen counter, the 3-week late rent, the particular arithmetic of someone who cannot afford to misread a room. Enough to know it's not my business, he said, and enough to know that if you want me to pretend I didn't see it, I can do that. She studied him. And if I want the opposite, then I'll help you. Ariana Sterling picked up her fork again, looked down at her food, and said nothing else for the rest of lunch. The afternoon came apart in the way afternoons sometimes do in executive offices, suddenly, loudly, and with very little warning. At 2:14, the rescheduled meeting blew up because 2 of the attendees had gotten conflicting information about the agenda change and arrived expecting different things. At 2:19, the catering Ariana had requested for a separate event arrived 40 minutes early. At 2:22, the head of the legal department called in a panic because a filing deadline had been misread, and by the time Logan had sorted that out, Ariana's 2:30 call had been pushed to 3:15 without her being notified. Logan handled it in sequence, without theatrics, without asking her for guidance on things he could figure out himself. Each time he had to make a call he didn't have authority over, he told her first in a single sentence, I'm escalating the catering to facilities. The legal deadline is resolved. Your 3:15 call has context I'll brief you on before you dial. She didn't thank him. She didn't snap at him either. Around 4:30, she called across the office. The Linden report. On your desk. I asked for it an hour ago. I sent it to your email at 3:40 and left a hard copy on your desk at 4:05 when I saw the email hadn't been opened. She looked at her desk. The report was exactly where he'd said. She picked it up and read it. At 5:50, Logan was preparing to finalize the next morning's brief when Ariana said from across the room, My 6 o'clock is at the Meridian. Car service is late. Reschedule it. He checked the calendar. The Meridian dinner with Director Harrow is a relationship maintenance meeting. If it gets rescheduled, it needs to be within the same week or the window closes. I know what it is. Thursday at 7 has a conflict, but Friday at 6:30 is open on both ends. I can confirm Friday before I leave tonight. Pause. You're leaving at 6? My son's school pickup has a hard cutoff. I was upfront about that in the interview. She said nothing for a moment. Then, who handles pickup if you can't make it? Mrs. Chu across the hall, but I pay her for that, and tonight I haven't arranged it. What does she charge? Logan looked over at her. She was still looking at her screen. $40. Why? Go get your son. She pulled something from her drawer, a company card, and set it on the edge of her desk. Reimburse her through the office. I'll have Danny add her as an emergency contact buffer. Logan didn't move for a second. That's unusual, he said. Yes. You don't usually... No. She finally looked up. You're still here. That's also unusual. Don't make me regret either one. He walked to her desk and took the card. He didn't say thank you in the way that would have made her uncomfortable, the kind of gratitude that came with weight and obligation and feeling. He just said, "I'll send the Friday confirmation to Director Harrow before I leave." Good. He sent it from his phone in the elevator. It did. Pete was still at the security desk when Logan came back through the lobby. "You're here late," Pete said, glancing at the clock. "Nearly 6. "Nearly." Pete leaned back and crossed his arms. "So, how was it?" Logan thought about it. About the 11:40 phone call she hadn't answered, and the modified contract clause, and the folder she'd said was in a locked drawer. About the company card sitting on the edge of her desk, like she'd made the decision before she knew she was going to. "Complicated," he said. Pete nodded. "They always come back and say it was fine," he said. "The ones who last more than a morning. Then by day 3 they're using the third-floor vending machine." Logan tucked his jacket under his arm. "I'll see you tomorrow, Pete." Pete watched him go. Then he shook his head slowly, the way people do when they're not sure what they just witnessed. "Huh," he said, to no one. Logan's apartment was not a place he'd spent much energy on. It was clean because he kept it clean. That was the kind of person he was. But it was spare in the way that a single-parent household on a stretched budget gets spare when all the decorative energy goes into making the kid's room feel like somewhere safe to be. Ethan's room had a solar system mobile above the bed, and a shelf of picture books he'd outgrown but refused to give up, and 3 drawings on the wall that he'd made at school and Logan had framed because they were, genuinely, very good. The rest of the apartment was just functional. Logan came in at 6:38 to find Ethan cross-legged on the couch with his tablet, earbuds in, watching something that involved a lot of animated explosions. "Hey," Logan said. Ethan pulled one earbud out. "Hey, Dad? You eat?" Mrs. Chu made soup. Logan set his bag down and loosened his tie. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the bills on the counter. 3 of them. He knew what they said. He'd been knowing what they said for 2 months. "Dad?" He turned. Ethan was watching him from the couch, one earbud still out. "You okay?" Ethan asked. He was 8. He'd started asking that question when he was 6, which was about 6 months after his mother died, and Logan had never fully gotten used to it, the way his son watched him with that particular attention, like a small person who had learned very early that the adults around him needed checking on. "Yeah, buddy. Good day." "Did you get fired?" "No." Ethan looked back at his tablet. "Okay." He put the earbud back in. Logan stood in the kitchen for another moment. Then he opened the fridge and started on dinner. He sat on the edge of Ethan's bed at 9:15, after lights out, in the dark. "What's your boss like?" Ethan asked. He was on his back, looking up at the solar system mobile like he was navigating by it. "Smart." "Nice?" Logan thought about it. "No, not really." "Scary?" "Not to me." Ethan considered this. "Why not?" "Because she wants things done. She's not trying to be scary, she's trying to be effective." He paused. Sometimes people who are really good at something come across as scary when they're actually just impatient. "Like how you get when I take too long to tie my shoes?" Logan made a sound that was almost a laugh. "That's different." "You make the same face." Logan was quiet for a moment. "Maybe." Ethan reached up toward the mobile, not touching it, just letting his fingers hang near one of the planets. "Is she in a wheelchair?" "Yeah." "Like Uncle Dav?" "Similar setup." Ethan nodded like that settled something. Then he said, "Did she like you?" "I don't know." "Did she fire you?" "No." "Then she probably likes you," Ethan said with the absolute confidence of an 8-year-old. Logan reached out and steadied the mobile. "Go to sleep." "Night, Dad." "Night, Bud." He sat there a minute longer in the dark before he got up. The next morning, Logan arrived at 7:52. Ariana was already at her desk. She didn't look up when he came in. "Close the door." He did. "The Reyes folder," she said. "I need you to pull every communication related to that contract from the past 6 months. Not just documents, calendar invites, email threads, anything that touched that file. I need a timeline by 11. Logan set his bag down. "Working quietly?" I don't need to explain that to you. You don't. But if this is what I think it is, I need to know how careful to be so I don't accidentally tip something before you're ready. She looked at him then, full on, the way she had the day before. Very careful, she said. He nodded. He sat down at his workstation. Logan. He looked up. She was still looking at him. Her expression hadn't changed, but there was something behind it now. Not gratitude, not warmth. Something more complicated. Something that was working out whether it was safe to say the next thing. If you find something that surprises you, she said, come to me first. Not Danny, not legal, me. Understood. She turned back to her monitors. Logan opened the archive and started pulling threads. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was already loud and moving and indifferent. 32 floors below, Pete was probably starting his shift. And somewhere across town, Ethan was eating breakfast and probably already thinking about what he was going to draw today. Logan found the first thread. Read the timestamp. Found the second. He kept his face completely still. Because what he was reading wasn't just a contract irregularity. It was the beginning of something much worse. And whatever came next, he understood now that he was in it. Not because he'd chosen the fight, but because he'd come to work early on a Wednesday and read a folder he wasn't supposed to see. He thought about Pete's voice in the lobby. Most people eat something before they go back downstairs. He pulled the third thread. He kept going. The timeline Logan built that first morning ran to 11 pages by the time he was done. He didn't print it. He saved it to a personal encrypted folder he created under a file name that looked like a standard budget document. The kind of thing no one would open unless they already knew what they were looking for. Then he walked to Ariana's desk and told her, in a quiet voice, that he'd found what she'd asked for and that she should probably read it when no one else was on the floor. She looked at him. That bad? I'd rather you see it yourself first. She held his gaze for a beat, then nodded. After the board prep call at noon. Clear my calendar from 1:30. He did. What Logan had found was not a single act of corruption. It was a pattern, careful, gradual, almost elegant in the way that genuinely dangerous things sometimes are. The modifications to the Reyes contract were only the most recent layer. Beneath it, spread across 6 months of archived communications, was a thread of redirected approvals, quietly restructured reporting lines, and a series of internal memos that had never been logged in the main system. Somebody had been building a paper case, slow and methodical, that positioned Ariana Sterling not as a decisive executive, but as an erratic one. A CEO whose judgment had become unreliable, whose decisions needed secondary oversight, whose condition, though never stated outright in any single document, hovered at the edges of every carefully worded concern like smoke you could smell but not see. Logan didn't know yet who was behind it, but he knew this much. Whoever it was had access to things that required either a senior title or a very trusted proximity. He spent the rest of the morning keeping that knowledge off his face and doing his job. The board prep call ran long, as board prep calls always do. Ariana ran it with the kind of concentrated authority that left very little room for tangential conversation. She moved through agenda items at a pace that made clear she'd already done the thinking, and the call was for confirmation, not collaboration. Logan sat at the far end of the conference table with his laptop open, tracking action items in real time, flagging 2 that got verbally assigned without clear ownership, and quietly correcting a figure in the presentation deck that one of the finance team members had pulled from an outdated model. He sent the correction as an inline note in the shared document. Didn't announce it, didn't interrupt. Ariana caught it mid-sentence, paused almost imperceptibly, and kept going. After the call ended and the last dial-in clicked off, she sat for a moment looking at the correction in the document. Where did you pull the updated figure from? She asked. Q3 reconciliation report, filed last Thursday. The model the team was using referenced the Q2 baseline. She closed her laptop. How did you know the Q2 baseline was wrong? I didn't know it was wrong. I knew it was older, so I checked. She looked at him with that particular look. The one that wasn't impressed, but was something adjacent to it. Something more like recalibration, like she kept doing arithmetic in her head and coming out with a number she hadn't expected. 1:30, she said. Cleared. She wheeled herself to her desk and waited while the last of the finance team filtered out. When the glass door closed and the floor was quiet, Logan brought his laptop to the chair closest to her desk and opened the file. He walked her through it without editorializing. Just structure and sequence. Here is the first modification. Here is the date. Here is the memo that followed. Here is where the reporting chain changes. He showed her the pattern the way you show someone a map. Here is where you are. Here is where the path leads, and here is what it means about who's been walking it. Ariana didn't speak through most of it. She read everything he pointed to, asked 2 precise questions about sourcing, and sat back. There was a long silence. "Marcus Hale," she said. It wasn't a question. Logan hadn't said the name. He hadn't been certain enough to say the name, but she said it the way someone says something they've been half knowing for a while and finally have to hear out loud. "The memos route through his office," Logan said carefully. "The restructured approval chain puts him in the sign-off position on anything that would otherwise require your direct authorization, but I can't—" "It's Hale," she said again. Her voice was level, still that flat transactional register. But there was something underneath it now that Logan recognized from the day before. The same tightening she'd tried to hide after the phone call she hadn't answered. Something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. Something that was both of those things rubbing against each other in a way that produced neither. Marcus Hale was her EVP of partnerships. He'd been with the company for 4 years. He had a corner office 2 floors down and a reputation for being the steadiest, most reasonable senior executive in the building. Logan thought about that, about what it meant to be the most reasonable person in the room for 4 years while building something like this. "What do you need from me?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She was looking at the window, not at the city, just at the glass. "I need you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Nothing changes outwardly. You don't mention this to anyone, including Danny. You document everything from this point forward. Every communication you handle, every interaction, every request that comes from Hale's office or anyone connected to him. And when you have enough, I'll know when I have enough." She turned from the window. "Can you do that? Not ask me for a timeline, not flag it every morning. Just do the work and trust that I'm moving on my end." Logan thought about the bills on his kitchen counter, about Ethan's inhaler prescription, which needed refilling next week, about the particular discipline of someone who has learned to play a long game because short games kept not working out. "Yes," he said. "Good." She pulled her keyboard toward her. "Go back to work." He went back to work. The following 2 weeks were a kind of controlled experiment in endurance. Ariana seemed to wake every morning with a fresh inventory of impossible things that needed doing immediately, and she delivered this inventory without warmth and without apology. She changed meeting schedules with the casual regularity of someone rearranging furniture, never explaining why, rarely giving adequate notice, always expecting that by the time she finished issuing the change, the downstream effects were already being managed. Logan managed them. He was not perfect at it. There were 2 mornings in the first week where he missed something. Once a calendar conflict he should have caught before it became a problem. Once a vendor communication that went out in the wrong sequence because he'd been handling 3 other things at once. Both times, Ariana caught it. Both times she told him in the particular way she had of telling people things that made clear the telling was not a kindness, just information being transferred at the appropriate moment. Logan didn't apologize excessively. He said he'd fix it and fixed it. She didn't let it go right away. That was one of her patterns. She'd file a mistake somewhere in her processing and bring it back up later, not as punishment, but almost like evidence in an ongoing internal case she was building. Are you consistent? Are you reliable? Or are you like everyone else, just better at hiding it? He understood that now. It wasn't cruelty, it was testing. And the only way to pass was to not try to pass, to just do the actual work and let it speak. What made it harder was that the work wasn't only difficult because of Ariana. The hidden documentation project was running parallel to everything else, quietly, in the margins of days that were already overfull. Every communication that came through Hale's office had to be logged with an extra layer of context, date, originating sender, what it appeared to be on the surface, what it might mean in the pattern Logan was building. He kept it all in the same encrypted folder, updated it every night before he left, and said nothing. By the end of the second week, the folder was 37 pages. He still hadn't told her how bad it was getting. The investor presentation was on a Thursday. It was a major one. Not the kind of quarterly update that happened by video conference, but the kind that happened in a rented conference room in a downtown building with floor-to-ceiling glass and a catered reception and 14 people flying in from 4 different cities. Sterling Technologies was approaching a Series D funding round, and the people in that room controlled enough capital to either accelerate the company's next phase or quietly redirect it toward someone else's vision. Logan had been prepping for it for a week. Not just logistics. He'd read every deck, sat in on 2 run-throughs, and built a contingency sheet that mapped every likely disruption against a response. He didn't show Ariana the contingency sheet. She didn't ask for it. But he had it in his jacket pocket. She presented the way she ran meetings. Without performance, without the particular kind of charisma that people deploy when they need others to feel good about giving them money. She was direct, and she was specific, and she let the numbers do the work that other CEOs tried to do with narrative. It was effective. You could feel it in the room, the shift in posture that meant people were following now, actually following, not just being polite. Logan sat along the wall with the other support staff. His job during the presentation was to manage the slide transitions, field any incoming logistics issues from the back of the room, and stay invisible. 40 minutes in, he noticed it. It was nothing obvious, just a quality in her stillness. She'd gone from the controlled stillness of someone presenting to a different kind of stillness. Something tighter. She was speaking mid-sentence when it happened, and she didn't stop speaking, but something shifted in the set of her jaw, and her left hand, which had been resting on the arm of her wheelchair, closed slowly into a partial fist. Logan knew what chronic pain looked like. His wife had lived with it for the last 8 months of her life, and he had learned to read it in the small places. The places people learned to hide it because showing it felt like losing ground. He looked at the room. 14 investors, 3 members of the Sterling executive team, 2 photographers from the company's communications department. No one else was watching Ariana closely enough to see what he'd just seen. He stood up quietly, moved to the side of the room near the AV station, and leaned down to the technician there, a young guy named Felix he'd spoken to twice during setup.
"Felix," he said quietly, "can you bring up the live market data overlay? The one we talked about for the Q&A?" Felix looked slightly confused. That was for after the presentation. "She wants to integrate it earlier. Pull it up and hold on my signal." Felix started pulling it up.
Logan walked to the front of the room, approached Ariana's left side, not her right. Never the right when someone was in active pain, because turning right would cost her, and bent slightly, as if consulting on a slide note. He said, barely above a whisper, "Take 30 seconds. I've got a visual break ready." She looked at him. Her expression didn't change. "I'm in the middle of..." "I know, 30 seconds." There was a half-beat. Then she said, clearly and smoothly, addressing the room, "While we transition to the next data segment, I want to give you all a moment to look at the live market context. Felix, go ahead and bring that up." Felix brought it up. The room's attention moved to the large display as the overlay populated. People leaned in, started murmuring to each other. Normal presentation behavior, natural break. Logan stood at Ariana's side. He didn't look at her. He looked at the room, the way a support person was supposed to. In his peripheral vision, he saw her hand unclench, saw her take one careful breath, saw the set of her jaw release by perhaps 2 degrees. 28 seconds later, she said, "Let me walk you through what you're seeing here." And she was back. Fully, completely, without seam. No one in the room had noticed anything. When the presentation ended and the investors broke into the reception, Ariana moved through it with the deliberate efficiency she brought to every social requirement. Logan stayed at the perimeter, managing the flow of incoming requests and keeping the executive team pointed toward the right conversations. It was an hour later, when most of the room had thinned out and the catering staff was beginning to clear, that Ariana wheeled herself to where Logan stood near the window. She didn't say anything for a moment, then, "That was not in the run of show." "No? You made a call without telling me first." He'd been waiting for this. "I know, I thought the window was too short to ask first. I should have been faster." She was quiet, looking out the window at the street below. "You would have been right," she said. "If you'd asked first, you'd have been too late." Logan said nothing. "Don't do it again," she said. "Understood." I mean, don't handle it that way again." She paused, and something in her voice changed Just slightly, just enough. If it happens again, we work out a system beforehand, a signal, so I'm driving the decision. He looked at her. She was still looking out the window. Okay, he said. We can do that. She turned her wheelchair away from the window. The Harrow dinner is in an hour and a half. I need 20 minutes in the car. It's downstairs. She moved toward the exit. He fell into pace, behind and to the left, the way he'd learned she preferred. Close enough to be available, far enough to not be hovering. In the elevator, there were two other people from the event. Small talk filled the space. Logan held the door. Ariana answered a question about the market outlook with 3 sentences that were both completely accurate and completely uninformative. When the elevator opened to the lobby, she moved through it without pausing. Logan followed. To men. The dynamic between them shifted after the presentation, though neither of them named it. It wasn't warmth. Ariana Sterling didn't move toward warmth with any particular enthusiasm, and Logan didn't need it from her. It was more like a different kind of professional calibration. She started telling him things slightly earlier in the process. Not much. Sometimes only a few hours. Sometimes only a sentence of context that she would previously have withheld. But he noticed, and he suspected she knew he noticed, and that she'd decided that was acceptable. She also started, occasionally, pushing back on his pushback. This was new. Before, when he anticipated something or redirected a task, she either accepted it silently or corrected him in the flat, final way that closed the conversation. Now, occasionally she'd argue. Not always, not loudly, but she'd say, "That's not why I want it done that way," or "You're reading that wrong," and then explain, which meant she expected the explanation to be received and considered, not just complied with. He considered it. Sometimes he changed his approach. Sometimes he held his position. When he held it, she didn't punish him for it, which told him something about the kind of argument she found useful versus the kind she just found irritating. He filed all of this away. Not strategically, just because he was a person who paid attention and she was turning out to be someone worth paying attention to. The thing that surprised him most wasn't any single event. It was the Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks into the role when he was cross-referencing the encrypted documentation and caught something he hadn't expected. He'd been tracking Hale's moves, the contract modifications, the reporting chain restructure, the internal memos. But he'd been tracking them forward, following the pattern from its earliest point to the present. He hadn't gone sideways. He hadn't asked the question of who else. Now, he did. He spent 2 hours that afternoon pulling every communication he could access, staying within the bounds of what his role legitimately gave him, and building a secondary map. Not just who Hale was coordinating with overtly, but who had signed off on things without asking questions they should have asked, who had been CC'd on memos they should have flagged, who had been in rooms at key moments and said nothing. By the time he was done, the map had 4 names on it. Hale was one. The others were a senior VP in finance, a member of the board's advisory committee, and a woman named Petra Voss, who ran the company's external communications and had, in Logan's observation over 3 weeks, exchanged approximately 3 times more private messages with Hale's office than her role should have required. He sat back and looked at the screen. Then he closed the folder and went back to the afternoon's task list. He didn't tell Ariana that night. He needed to be certain about one more thing before he said the name Petra Voss out loud. What confirmed it came from an unexpected direction. Ariana had a standing medical appointment on the second Friday of every month. It wasn't on the company calendar. It appeared in a personal calendar that he had access to purely for scheduling purposes and had never raised with her. The appointment was at a clinic across town, and it ran 2 hours, and on those Fridays she came back to the office a little later and a little more closed off than usual, in a way that he'd learned not to address directly. On the second Friday of that month, Logan was alone on the executive floor. He was working through a document review when Petra Voss appeared at the glass door. She was polished in the way that communications executives tend to be polished. Calibrated, nothing out of place. She knocked lightly on the open door, smiled in a practiced way, and said she'd been hoping to drop something off for Ariana. "She's out until 2, Logan said. "Of course." Petra set a folder on the reception edge of his desk. Not Ariana's desk, just the edge of his. "Just some press material she asked for,"
Nothing urgent. She was already turning to leave. I'll make sure she gets it, Logan said. Petra paused, just briefly. Then she smiled again, the same practiced one, and said, You're the new EA, aren't you, Logan? That's right. How are you settling in? Fine, thanks. She nodded. She's not easy. I hope you know that. He looked at her. I think most people in the building have made sure I know that. Something passed through Petra's expression. Quick, almost invisible. Not discomfort, more like assessment. She was reading him the same way Ariana did, but the motive was different. Ariana read people to decide if they were useful. Petra Voss was reading him to decide if he was a problem. Well, Petra said, let me know if you ever need anything. This floor can be isolating. I appreciate that. She left. Logan waited until she reached the elevator. Then he looked at the folder she'd left. It was sealed. He didn't open it. He photographed the outside, the routing stamp, the date notation, the way it was labeled, and added the photo to the encrypted folder with a timestamp and a note. Delivered by PV during AS absence. Placement at EA desk, not inside office. Then he set the folder on Ariana's desk exactly as Petra had intended and went back to his work. When Ariana returned at 2:10, she looked at the folder, then at Logan. Where did that come from? Petra Voss dropped it at noon. A pause, the kind that said something. Did she come inside? Only to the doorway. Ariana picked up the folder and opened it. Logan watched her read the first page. Her expression didn't change, didn't shift in any way he could specifically identify. But something happened in her posture. That tightening again. Different from pain. More like a person who has just been handed something that confirms something they already suspected and had been hoping was wrong. She closed the folder. Anything else happen while I was out? She asked. Nothing that isn't in the log. She nodded and set the folder to the side. That evening, when he was packing to leave, she said from across the room without looking up, How close are you to having everything? He thought about the map with 4 names, about the photograph of Petra Voss's sealed folder, about 37 pages of documented pattern and what it would take a lawyer to work through. Close, he said. How close? He zipped his bag. Ask me again Monday. She was quiet for a moment. Monday, she said. He picked up his bag and headed for the door. Behind him, he heard the sound of her keyboard starting again. Fast, precise, with the particular rhythm that meant she wasn't drafting an email, but thinking through something that required words to think through. He closed the glass door quietly and went to get his son. The elevator ride down was long enough that he had time to think about what came next. He thought about Hale, who had spent 4 years being the most reasonable man in the building. He thought about Petra Voss and her practiced smile. He thought about the 4 names on the map and what it would mean for each of them when the map became evidence. He thought about Ariana Sterling at her desk, late on a Friday, working through something in the only way she knew how, alone and moving fast and not asking for help. He pressed the lobby button again, even though it was already lit. The elevator descended. Pete was at the desk. Of course he was. Still here, Pete said. Still here, Logan agreed. Pete looked at him for a moment with that particular expression, the one that was somewhere between assessment and something that might have been respect, if Pete had been the kind of man to say that word out loud. Monday, Pete said, like he'd overheard something. Logan walked through the lobby and out into the evening air, where the city was already doing what it always did, loud and indifferent, and completely unaware that somewhere on the 32nd floor, something that had been quietly breaking for months was about to break in a very different direction. Monday came the way difficult things tend to come, without announcement, already in motion by the time you realize it's arrived. Logan got to the office at 7:45. Ariana was already there, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the second coffee cup on the edge of his desk, not placed there by accident, positioned deliberately, still hot, from the place 2 blocks over that he'd mentioned once, offhandedly, 3 weeks ago in a conversation about the building's terrible lobby coffee. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. She was already typing and didn't turn around. You said you had something to tell me Monday. He sat down, pulled the coffee toward him, and opened his laptop. Give me 10 minutes. You have 8. He took 9,
because one of the new threads he'd pulled over the weekend had branched in a direction he needed to verify before he said it out loud. When he was satisfied, he walked to her desk and set his laptop where she could see the screen. "Petra Voss," he said. Ariana looked at the screen. She read without expression for 60 seconds. Then, "Show me the timeline." He scrolled to it. Another silence, longer this time. He watched her process it. Not the slow processing of someone surprised, but the faster, more controlled processing of someone who is confirming a suspicion they'd been sitting with for a while and deciding what to do with the confirmation. "How long?" she finally said. "The earliest document I can trace her to is 8 months ago, but the communication patterns suggest she was involved before that. I just can't access anything older with what I have." 8 months, she said it quietly, almost to herself. "She was in my house 8 months ago. There was a company dinner." She stopped. Something passed across her face that was private and complicated, and Logan looked back at the screen to give it space. After a moment, she said, "Is this enough to take to outside counsel?" "I think it's enough to start a conversation. It's not enough to guarantee the outcome you'd need at a board level." "What else do I need?" "Ideally, something that shows intent at the point of execution. Not just the pattern, the moment of action. A communication where someone says explicitly what they're trying to do, or a financial record that shows a benefit flowing to one of the four in connection with the outcome they're engineering." She was quiet. "I've been looking," Logan said, "but I'm at the edge of what I can access without authorization I don't have." "I can get you that authorization. If you do it through the company system, whoever is watching the system access logs will know within 24 hours. She looked at him. "You think they're watching access logs?" "If I were running what they're running, I'd be watching access logs." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "I have an outside IT security consultant I've used before. She's not connected to the company network. I can have her run a parallel audit." "That's the right move." "I know it's the right move. I was telling you, not asking. But the edge in it was habit, not heat. I need 2 more days before I make that call. There's a finance committee meeting Wednesday, and I need to understand what Voss is planning to present there before I move. I can monitor the prep documents through shared calendar access." "Do it." She turned back to her monitors. And Logan. He was already moving back to his desk. He stopped. "The coffee thing," she said, not turning around. "It's not a pattern. Don't make it one." He looked at the back of her head. "Understood." He sat down and started monitoring. Boom. He almost made it to Wednesday without the other thing happening. He was in the middle of pulling the finance committee prep documents that Tuesday evening. It was past 6, the floor was empty except for the 2 of them, and a cleaning crew working their way up from the lower floors, when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Mrs. Chu. That particular quality of stillness that only a parent knows. The kind that happens in the half second before you answer and you're already telling yourself it's fine. It's probably nothing, she sometimes calls when the pickup runs late. "Mrs. Chu," he said. "Logan." Her voice was careful. "Don't panic, he's okay, but we're at Northside Memorial." He was already on his feet. "What happened?" "He had an episode after school, worse than the usual. The inhaler wasn't enough, and I called the ambulance. I hope that was right. I didn't know if I should." "You did right. I'm coming." He was already gathering his jacket and his bag, moving across the office fast. "How bad?" "They got him stable. He's on oxygen. The doctor wants to keep him tonight for observation." Something in his chest, not quite pain, but something adjacent to it, something with weight. "Okay, I'm leaving now." He was halfway to the door when he realized Ariana was watching him from her desk. He stopped. He was aware of what this moment was. He was aware that it was the worst possible timing. He was aware that what he'd pulled tonight was only half complete, and Wednesday was tomorrow, and the finance committee was the move they'd been building toward. He met her eyes. "Ethan," he said. That was all. She looked at him for 1 second, then, "Go." The documents, I've pulled about 60% of what we need. It's in the folder. The access string is, I'll find it. Go." The Wednesday meeting, "Logan." Her voice was sharp, but not cold. Different. "I said go. Your son is in the hospital." He went. What? Northside Memorial was 18 minutes from the office on a Tuesday evening. Logan made it in 14. He was not someone who ran at emergencies. He moved through them with the contained speed of a person who'd learned that falling apart solved nothing and wasted time. But from the parking garage to the pediatric ward, he was almost running, his bag still over one shoulder, his jacket not fully on. Ethan was in a room on the 4th floor. He was small against the hospital bed in the way that children always seem smaller in hospitals, like the room was built for a different scale of thing. He had an oxygen cannula under his nose and a pulse monitor on his finger, and he was awake, watching the door, and when Logan came through it, Ethan's whole face did something complicated that was trying to be fine but wasn't quite making it. "Hey, bud." "Hey, Dad." Logan sat in the chair beside the bed and took Ethan's hand, the one without the monitor. He kept his voice level. He was very good at keeping his voice level. "How do you feel?" "Okay, kind of tired." "That's normal after an episode." He squeezed the hand. "You scared Mrs. Chu." "I scared myself," Ethan said, with an honesty that landed like a small stone in still water. Logan looked at him. 8 years old. He had his mother's eyes, same shape, same particular quality of attention, and Logan had spent 3 years learning not to flinch at that resemblance because it wasn't fair to Ethan, and it wasn't what Claire would have wanted. "The doctor talked to me in the hallway," Mrs. Chu said from the corner. Logan had almost forgotten she was there. She was 64 and Korean American, and she'd been watching Ethan since he was 5. And she looked shaken in the private way that people who love other people's children get shaken when those children get hurt. She said his current medication protocol might need adjusting. The severity of this episode was, she used a word I wrote down. She produced a notepad from her purse. "Escalating." "Escalating," Logan repeated. "She wants to talk to you about a specialist, a pulmonologist at Eastbridge Children's. She said there's a waiting list, but the referral would get him prioritized." Logan nodded. He was already doing the arithmetic he always did. The bills, the current insurance coverage, the gap between what was covered and what wasn't. The arithmetic that lived in the back of his head like a low-grade frequency he'd stopped being able to turn off. He stayed until Ethan fell asleep around 9, which didn't take long because the episode had exhausted him. Then he stepped into the corridor and stood against the wall with his phone in his hand and his jacket finally all the way on. He called the office number on instinct, which was strange because it was 9 at night. She picked up on the second ring. "He's stable," Logan said. "Sleeping. They want to keep him overnight." "What does he need?" The question caught him off guard. Not "how is he?" Not "I hope he's okay." Just the practical, direct, forward-facing version of concern that Ariana Sterling apparently applied to everything, including other people's children. "The doctor wants a specialist consult. Pulmonologist at Eastbridge. There's a waiting list." A brief silence. "I'll make a call." "You don't have to... I have a board member who funds the Eastbridge pediatric wing. I can have a consultation scheduled by Thursday." Another pause. "That's not charity. That's a resource allocation I have access to. Don't make it into something uncomfortable." Logan looked down the corridor. The fluorescent lights were the particular ugly yellow of every hospital he'd ever been in. "Okay," he said. "The finance committee prep. I found the folder. I pulled the rest of what you started. You should look at it when you can. I'll come in early tomorrow, before the meeting." "Ethan will be released in the morning?" "Probably around 8. Then come in when you can. The meeting isn't until 2. She paused again. "The documents are more complicated than I expected. I need your read on something." "What kind of complicated?" "The kind where I'm not sure anymore that this is only about my position." Her voice was flat and even, but underneath it something was working very hard. "I think the endgame is a forced sale. I think they want to sell the company." Logan went still. "To who?" "I don't know yet, but there are acquisition signals in the financial modeling documents that have no internal purpose. They're formatted for an outside audience. Someone has already been building a pitch." A beat. "That's why Wednesday matters more than I told you." He understood. This wasn't just a power play, this was a liquidation. Hale and his associates weren't trying to run Sterling Technologies. They were trying to sell it out from under her. "I'll be there by 10, Logan said. "Fine." Then, before she hung up, "Get some sleep. You can't think straight when you're running on hospital corridor air. The line went quiet. Logan stood in the corridor for another moment, then went back into Ethan's room and sat in the chair beside the bed, in the dark, and tried to think straight. Oh, sit. He got 3 hours of sleep on the chair. It wasn't enough, but it was what it was. By 7:30, Ethan was awake and eating the hospital's idea of breakfast, a small cup of apple juice and something beige that was supposedly oatmeal, and the attending physician was doing morning rounds. She was a brisk, competent woman named Dr. Park, who delivered information the way people do when they respect your ability to handle it. Lung function is back in the acceptable range, she told Logan, but I want to be clear that this episode represents a pattern shift. What was working for him 6 months ago is no longer adequate. He needs a more comprehensive management plan. The referral to Eastbridge. I put it in the system last night. Realistically, the standard wait, I think the timeline might be shorter than standard. I'll know by this afternoon. Dr. Park looked at him. Do you have a connection at Eastbridge? My employer does. She nodded, making notes. If you can get him in within the next 2 weeks, that would be ideal. In the meantime, I'm adjusting the rescue protocol and adding a second preventive medication. I'll go over it with you before discharge. Logan wrote everything down. Not on his phone, actual paper, in the small notebook he carried in his jacket pocket, the same one he'd been using since Ethan was diagnosed 2 years ago. There was something about handwriting it that made him feel like it was real and manageable. A page he could look at, evidence that he was on top of it. Ethan watched him write. Dad. Yeah. Are we going to have to move again? Logan looked up. What? Because of the hospital bills, are we going to move somewhere cheaper? 8 years old, doing his own arithmetic. No, Logan said. We're not moving. You don't have to say that if... Ethan. He put the notebook down. We are not moving. I have a job that covers this, okay? That's what the job is for. Ethan looked at him for a moment with those eyes. His mother's eyes, careful and steady and a little bit old. Then he looked back at his oatmeal. Okay? It wasn't entirely the truth. It was the truth in the direction Logan was pointing everything, which was the best he could do. He got to the office at 10:12. Ariana was on a call when he came in. She held up one finger without turning around, which he'd learned meant close. 1 minute, don't go anywhere. He sat at his desk and pulled up the documents she'd left in the folder. She was right. They were more complicated than he'd expected. The financial modeling was sophisticated, not amateur work. Whoever had built it knew what they were doing. The documents were formatted as an acquisition prospectus, complete with valuation methodology, synergy projections, and a risk matrix that very specifically addressed the company's only remaining liability, the founding CEO's continued operational control. The language around Ariana was clinical and careful. It never said she was incapacitated. It said she represented transition risk. It said the company's long-term trajectory required leadership continuity planning. It used the word succession framework 4 times. Logan read it twice. Then he read the metadata. The document had been created 8 months ago. It had been modified 43 times. The most recent modification was 3 days ago. The author field had been scrubbed. But the template origin, a piece of software metadata that got embedded automatically in the file properties, pointed to a document consulting firm based downtown, the same firm he would find when he cross-referenced against the communication logs that Petrovos had contracted for a strategic communications audit 14 months ago. He was still processing this when Ariana ended her call. Tell me you found the author, she said. I found where the template came from. It's a consulting firm. I need 2 more hours to build the chain from the firm back to a name. You have one. She wheeled herself toward his desk, which she'd never done before, always called him to her. She leaned over slightly to look at his screen. This is the valuation model? Yes. They've got the company valued at $940. Her voice was flat. That's low by 40%. They're not trying to get a fair price. They're trying to move it fast. To a buyer who's already interested. Which means there's already a buyer. She straightened. Someone has already been approached. Someone has already said yes in principle. She looked at the window. They needed me out before they could close it. Logan looked at her profile. The precision of her face in the morning light, the particular stillness she was holding right now, the kind that meant she was keeping something steady by force of will. Ariana. He'd used her first name once before, and she hadn't corrected him. He used it now carefully. What happens to the company if this goes through? The acquirer is almost certainly Viridian Capital. They buy technology companies and they asset strip them. They'll take the IP, the client contracts, and the platform infrastructure. The operational teams get restructured in the first 6 months. That's their pattern. How many employees? 412, across 3 offices. She said it like she'd said it before many times, in her own head. Most of them have been here at least 2 years, some of them longer. The weight of it sat between them for a moment. Then we need to move before Wednesday, Logan said. The meeting is at 2. I know, which gives us, he checked the time, 3 hours and 48 minutes. She looked at him. Can you finish the chain in 1 hour? 1 hour and 15 to do it right. Do it right? She turned back toward her desk. I'm going to make a call to outside counsel. If I'm going to walk into that room this afternoon with what you're building, I need a lawyer who's already read it. Mira Cheng, Logan said. She stopped. You mentioned her in the board prep call 3 weeks ago. You said she was the sharpest litigator you'd ever dealt with. I looked her up. Her firm does corporate fraud and securities law. Ariana was quiet for a long moment. Then, she's also going to charge me $400 an hour to hear this on short notice. Is that a problem? No? She picked up her personal phone, not the company one. It's not a problem. The hour and 15 minutes was actually an hour and 8. The chain from the consulting firm ran through a shell LLC to a holding company that had been incorporated in Delaware 18 months ago. The holding company's registered agent was a law firm. The law firm had one senior partner who appeared, when Logan cross-referenced against LinkedIn and corporate filings, on the board of Viridian Capital. He printed nothing. He copied everything to his encrypted folder and a second backup on a personal cloud drive he'd set up 3 weeks ago for exactly this moment. Then he wrote a clean summary, 3 pages, tight, sequential, that laid out the full chain from the earliest modified contract to the acquisition prospectus to the Viridian connection, with source references for every claim. He walked it to Ariana's desk at 11:53. She read it without speaking. When she finished, she set it face down and looked at the far wall for a long moment. This is enough, she said, for Mira Cheng to start. Whether it's enough for the board this afternoon? It has to be enough for the board this afternoon. She turned to face him. Hale is going to walk into that room at 2 o'clock and present a motion. I don't know exactly how he'll frame it, but I know the frame. Board-directed leadership review, medical capacity assessment, interim management structure. He's been building to this for 8 months. If he gets the vote, even a preliminary procedural vote, the momentum shifts and it becomes very hard to stop. Then we have to get ahead of his frame. Which means I need to be the one who reveals the fraud, in the room, before he can present the motion as legitimate. She was very still. If I walk in there with what you've built, and I'm wrong about even one element, you're not wrong. If I'm wrong about even one element, she continued, I hand them exactly what they want. A CEO acting erratically, making unfounded accusations against senior executives, compromising board relationships. She looked at him. You understand what I'm asking you? You're asking me if I'm certain. Yes. Logan thought about the 43 modifications to the acquisition document, the consulting firm trail, the Viridian board member sitting behind the Delaware LLC. He thought about the photograph of Petra Voss's sealed folder and the way she'd read him in the doorway like she was deciding if he was a problem. I'm certain, he said. She held his gaze. Okay, she said. Then Logan's phone rang. He looked at the screen, Northside Memorial. He picked up. Yes, it was Dr. Park. Mr. Hayes, I wanted to let you know Ethan is ready for discharge. We have the paperwork ready whenever you can come. He looked at the clock on his laptop. 11:58. The board meeting was at 2. Mrs. Chu could pick Ethan up. She'd done it before. She had the authorization. But Ethan had just spent the night in the hospital, and he was 8 years old, and Logan had told him that morning that they were not moving, that the job covered it, that things were going to be okay. Ariana was watching him. "I need 2 hours," he said to Dr. Park. "I'll be there by 2. "The meeting," Ariana started. "I can't send someone else to pick him up from the hospital." He kept his voice even. "I'll be in the boardroom by 2:15. I'll have everything you need sent to Mira Cheng before I leave. If the meeting runs to a standard 90-minute structure, you'll have the first 40 minutes of positioning before you need me there with the physical documentation." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her expression that she didn't have a name for yet. Or maybe she had a name for it and she wasn't ready to say it. "The documentation has to be with Mira before you leave," she said. "It will be. 2:15 is the latest. 2:15. She turned back to her desk. "Go get your son." Oh, Ethan was quiet in the car on the way to Mrs. Chu's apartment. Not the quiet of a sick child, more the quiet of a child who has processed something and is still sitting with it. "Dad," he said from the back seat. "Yeah. Is your boss going to fire you because of last night?" "No." "How do you know?" "Because she told me to go." Ethan considered this. "She sounds different than how you described her the first week." Logan glanced in the rearview mirror. "People are different than how you described them the first week." "Is she still not nice?" "She's direct." He thought about the coffee cup on his desk that morning. "She's very direct." "Is that good?" "It's honest, which is better than some alternatives." Ethan pressed his face against the car window. Outside, the city moved past. Ordinary Tuesday mid-morning, people on sidewalks, a delivery truck double parked, a woman walking a dog that was trying to walk in 4 different directions at once. "I drew something at the hospital," Ethan said. He dug in his backpack and produced a folded piece of paper from the notepad Mrs. Chu had brought him. He held it up. It was a drawing of a building with a lot of windows, and in one of the windows at the top was a small figure in a wheelchair, and outside the building on the sidewalk was a smaller figure that was clearly supposed to be a man carrying a bag. Logan looked at it in the mirror. His throat did something. "That's a pretty good building," he said. "The lady in the window is your boss," Ethan said. "She looks out the window a lot, right? Because she can't go outside that much?" He actually didn't know if that was true. He'd never thought about it. "Maybe," he said. "The man outside is you," Ethan added helpfully, "in case you couldn't tell." "I could tell." He dropped Ethan at Mrs. Chu's at 1:43, made sure he had his adjusted medication and his rescue inhaler and strict instructions to rest, and drove to Sterling Technologies faster than was technically advisable. He walked into the boardroom at 2:11. The room was a long rectangle on the 32nd floor, separate from Ariana's office suite, with a conference table that seated 20 and windows on 2 sides. 12 people were seated. Ariana was at the head of the table. Marcus Hale was 3 seats to her right, and he was the image of reasonable composure, relaxed posture, an open folder in front of him, the expression of a man who has prepared carefully and expects the afternoon to go his way. Petra Voss was in the second row of observer chairs, not at the table. She was on her phone when Logan came in. She looked up. Their eyes met briefly. Her expression gave nothing. Logan set his bag down at the side table near the door, took out his laptop, and sat. Ariana looked at him once, just once, a check, and he gave her a single nod. She turned back to the room. "Before we move to the agenda," she said, her voice completely level, "I need to present a matter that takes precedence over the items currently listed." Hale's posture shifted, just slightly. Almost nothing. "I've been made aware," Ariana continued, "of a coordinated effort, originating within this company's senior leadership, to misrepresent my operational capacity to this board with the explicit purpose of engineering a forced transfer of executive authority, as a precursor to the acquisition of Sterling Technologies by a third party without board approval or shareholder disclosure." The room went very quiet. Logan opened the folder on his laptop and began sending documents to the board members' addresses. The clean summary, the source documentation, the acquisition prospectus, the corporate filing chain. 12 emails, outgoing, one after another. Hale said carefully, "Ariana, I think what you're describing, Marcus." Her voice hadn't changed. It was still flat, still transactional, but it had weight in it now that made the room hold still. Your phone is about to receive copies of 43 revisions to a document that was built using a template from a consulting firm that routes through a holding company connected to Viridian Capital's board. The earliest version is dated 8 months ago. You modified it yourself on 14 separate occasions. She paused. My attorney is on the line. A speaker in the center of the table, which no one had registered as being live, said, in a voice that was clear and unhurried, Mira Cheng and Associates. I'm counsel to Ms. Sterling, and I'm present for this portion of the meeting. The room absorbed this in pieces. Board members were looking at their phones. Hale was very still. Petra Voss, from the observer chairs, had gone the particular white of someone watching something they built fall in a direction they cannot stop. One of the board members, a woman named Caldwell, who'd been with the company since the Series B, said quietly, Marcus, what is this? Hale said nothing. Logan sat at the side table and watched Ariana Sterling hold that room together by the sheer force of her preparation and the unforgiving precision of everything she'd built in the last 3 weeks. The years of it, the weight of it, the cost of it. And he thought about Ethan's drawing, the figure in the window at the top of the building, looking out over a city that had no idea what was happening on the 32nd floor. She was still talking. She was going to be talking for a while. Logan kept the documents flowing. The board meeting ran 4 hours and 17 minutes. Logan knew this because he tracked it the same way he tracked everything, methodically, without drama, one timestamp after another. He was still at the side table when the last board member filed out at 6:28, and in all that time he had refilled the water pitcher twice, sent 9 additional document packages to Mira Cheng, handled 2 incoming calls that would have otherwise interrupted the proceedings, and eaten nothing. What happened in those 4 hours was not clean. It was not the swift, decisive unraveling that happens in movies, where evidence lands and guilt is immediately visible on every face and the right outcome assembles itself from the pieces. It was messier than that. It was slower. There were 40 minutes in the middle where 2 board members who were not part of the conspiracy but had been careless, had signed off on things without reading them, had let Hale run point on matters they should have scrutinized, became defensive in the way that people become defensive when they realize their negligence is about to become part of the public record. There were arguments about procedure. There was a recess that lasted 22 minutes while Mira Cheng's associate faxed additional documentation from the firm's office across town. And through all of it, Marcus Hale sat at his seat and said very little. That was the thing Logan hadn't expected. Not the bluster, not the counterattack, but the silence. Hale was smart enough to know when a room had turned, and the room had turned in the first 15 minutes, and from that point forward, he was doing a different kind of calculation. The kind that was no longer about winning, but about limiting damage. Petra Voss had left the observer section during the recess and didn't come back. When it was finally over, and the board had voted to place Hale and 3 other executives on immediate administrative leave, pending a formal investigation, and Mira Cheng had signed off from the speaker with a list of next steps that she delivered like a woman reading a grocery list, the room emptied in stages. Board members stopped to speak quietly with Ariana, some of them apologetic, some of them careful. One of them, Caldwell, direct and frank in a way that seemed to cost her something. I should have been paying closer attention, Caldwell said. She was 60-ish, silver-haired, and she said it the way people say hard things when they've decided that saying them is more important than managing how they land. I knew Marcus for 4 years. I trusted him more than I examined him. Ariana looked at her. Yes. I'm sorry. I know you are. Ariana's voice was even, not forgiving, not cold, just honest. What I need from you now is what you should have been doing for the past 8 months. Can you do that? Caldwell held her gaze. Yes. Then we'll move forward. It was an absolution, but it was a door left open, and Caldwell walked through it with the dignity of someone who understood the difference. When the last person was gone and the room was empty except for the 2 of them and the residue of a very long afternoon, the water glasses, the paper, the particular exhausted stillness of a space where something significant had just been decided, Logan closed his laptop and sat back in his chair. Ariana was at the head of the table. She hadn't moved from that position in 4 hours. She looked tired in a way she would not have let anyone see 2 months ago. A real tiredness, bone deep,
The kind that comes after sustained, concentrated effort, of the kind that costs you something you don't entirely get back. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Ariana said, "You were 11 minutes late." 2:11, Logan said. "You said 2:15 was the latest." "I said 2:15 was the latest. You were 2:11. She paused. "I'm not correcting you. I'm noting it." Noted." Another silence. "How's Ethan?" she asked. "Resting. Mrs. Chu has him." He rubbed his eyes briefly. He drew a picture of the building while he was in the hospital. "You're in one of the windows." She was quiet for a moment. "What am I doing in the window?" "Looking out?" She looked at the window, the real one, the one with the city in it, the city going about its evening business, as if nothing had happened on the 32nd floor of this building today.
"I should have seen Hale coming," she said. "I knew something was off. I'd known for months. I kept rationalizing it because he'd been here 4 years and he was... I trusted the tenure, the longevity. I thought longevity meant loyalty. It often does. It didn't here." "No." Logan thought about what to say next. He didn't dress it up. "You built the company fast. When you build things fast, you sometimes outrun your own vetting process. You surround yourself with people who were right for the earlier version of what you were building. They don't all grow with it." She turned from the window. "Is that meant to be reassuring?" "No, it's just accurate." She looked at him for a moment. Then something happened that Logan had not seen before in 6 weeks of working in close proximity to Ariana Sterling. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite. The ghost of one. Involuntary and brief and immediately contained. "You're terrible at reassurance," she said. "I've been told." "Good. I don't need it." But the ghost of the sound was still there, faint, in the way she turned back to the table. "I need you to pull Hale's direct reports tomorrow morning and identify which of them had legitimate involvement versus passive exposure. I don't want to clean house indiscriminately. Some of those people were just doing their jobs." "I can have a tiered assessment by noon." "Good." She folded her hands on the table. "And I need to address the full company, not a memo. I've been relying too much on memos. An all hands, Thursday morning. I'll set it up. I'll write it myself. I know." She looked at him. "You knew I'd say that? You always write the important things yourself. You send everything else through me." He saw her register that. The fact that he'd been paying that kind of attention, that level of granular attention, and hadn't said anything about it until now. "Efficient," she said, which, from Ariana Sterling, was a form of acknowledgement. The days that followed the board meeting were the kind of days that get described afterward as a period of significant transition, which is a phrase that makes the actual experience sound more organized than it is. There were lawyers. There were interviews with the company's internal investigation team. There were conversations with the 3 board members whose negligence had enabled the conspiracy without directly participating in it. Conversations that Ariana conducted herself, one at a time, in her office, with Logan outside the glass door managing the schedule and the paperwork and the incoming inquiries from the press that were starting to accumulate as word leaked, the way word always leaks. Logan managed the press inquiries through Petrovos's former assistant, a young woman named Grace, who was thorough and frightened and desperately relieved to be on the right side of what had happened. He spent 2 full days restructuring the communications team's protocols from the ground up, not because Ariana asked him to, but because the alternative was a leak that would get ahead of Thursday's all hands, and he wasn't going to let that happen. He told her what he was doing when he was halfway through it. She said, "Did I ask you to do that?" "No." "Are you going to tell me before you start things like this in the future?" "When I have time to, yes." She considered that. Fine. And went back to what she was doing. That was the new normal. Not warm, not soft, but functional in a different way than before. The constant low-level friction of the first weeks, the sense that she was perpetually testing the weight-bearing capacity of whoever was in the room with her, had shifted into something that was still demanding but no longer adversarial. She didn't stop changing the schedule at inconvenient times. She didn't stop catching mistakes or expecting them to be corrected without ceremony. But the quality of the silence between them had changed. It had become the comfortable silence of 2 people who have established that they can rely on each other, which is a different thing from the silence of two people still figuring that out. Ethan's consultation at Eastbridge Children's Hospital was on a Thursday, 10 days after the board meeting. Ariana had made the call as she said she would. Logan had verified the appointment twice and hadn't asked her about it again because she'd said she'd do it, and she had, and treating a done thing as if it still needed monitoring was exactly the kind of hovering she didn't tolerate. The pulmonologist's name was Dr. Soren Vance, young for his specialty, which Logan found either reassuring or concerning and couldn't decide which. He had a manner that managed to be both direct and kind, which is harder to achieve than it sounds, and he spent 40 minutes with Ethan doing the kind of thorough assessment that the original diagnosis had apparently skipped over. Ethan, for his part, was unexpectedly cooperative. He answered questions without his usual 8-year-old deflection, showed Doctor Vance his drawing notebook without being asked, and only made one joke at an inappropriate moment, which was actually a reasonable average for him. Afterward, Dr. Vance spoke to Logan in the corridor while Ethan was getting a lung function test done by the respiratory tech. The short version, Dr. Vance said, is that his current protocol is treating the symptoms without addressing the underlying inflammation pattern. It's not negligent, it's just the standard first-line approach. But Ethan has a more complex picture. I want to move him to a different medication class and add a monitoring protocol that'll give us better data over the next 3 months. Is this manageable? Very manageable. I'm not going to tell you this isn't something you'll be living with for a long time, because that wouldn't be honest. But with the right protocol, most kids his age, most people, function at a very high level. The goal is to get him to a place where this is a part of his life he manages, not a crisis he responds to. Logan was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the door of the room where Ethan was. He lost his mother 3 years ago, Logan said. He didn't know why he said it. It wasn't relevant to the medical conversation, but it came out anyway, the way things do when you've been holding them in a professional posture for a long time and something in a corridor catches you off guard. Doctor Vance nodded. He didn't say he was sorry, which Logan appreciated, not because he didn't mean it, but because sorry was not what the moment needed. Then he's had to be more aware of his own body than most 8-year-olds, Vance said. That actually helps with the monitoring protocol. Kids who've been through something real tend to be honest with their symptoms. Logan thought about Ethan saying, "I scared myself." "Yeah," he said. "He is." He told Ariana about the consultation the next morning, not in detail, just the outcome, the new protocol, the 3-month monitoring plan. She listened with her eyes on her monitor, which was her way of listening to things that weren't company business, and when he was done, she said, "Good," in a tone that carried more weight than the word itself. Then she said, "I've been thinking about what you said in the boardroom." He looked up. "Which part?" "The part about building fast and outrunning your own vetting process." She was still looking at her monitor. It wasn't the first time someone said something like that to me, but it was the first time I heard it as something other than criticism. He wasn't sure what to do with that. "How did you hear it?" "As something true that I could actually use." She turned from the monitor. "Which is different." There was a pause. Outside the windows, the city was doing its mid-morning thing, indifferent, constant, carrying no memory of what had happened in this building 2 weeks ago. "I want to restructure the senior leadership tier," she said, "not just fill the positions that were vacated. Restructure how they function. I've been running this company with too much concentration of access. I thought control was the same as stability. It's not." "What do you want the new structure to look like?" "I don't know yet. I know what I want it to feel like. I want to build something where the people around me have enough genuine authority that I'd notice if one of them went dark, where their involvement is real enough that a conspiracy like Hale's would have to be much wider to function, wide enough that it would fall apart under its own weight." Logan thought about that. "You'd have to actually trust the people you build that with." "Yes." She said it simply, not like it was easy. Just like she'd accepted that it was necessary. "That's harder than the structure." "I know that." A pause. "It's also why I'm starting with you." He looked at her. She held his gaze with the particular steadiness she brought to everything. Nothing soft about it. Nothing performed. "I need a chief of staff. Not the role that title usually means, which is administrative management with a senior label. I mean someone who operates at strategic level, who knows enough about every part of the company to identify what I'm missing, who I can trust to tell me when I'm wrong. She paused. I'm not asking you to accept it today. I know you came here for the salary and the flexibility, and none of this is what you signed up for. It's more than the original role. It's significantly more. The compensation would reflect that. That's not what I meant. He was trying to think through it honestly, the way he tried to think through everything, not the first reaction, but the one underneath it. I meant it's more complicated than the original role. I'd be in deeper than I am now. Yes? And if something went wrong again, then we'd deal with it the way we dealt with this. She said it without inflection. I'm not offering you certainty. I'm offering you the actual job, the one that's been happening for the past 6 weeks, with the title and the authority and the compensation that should have come with it from the beginning. She tilted her head slightly. And I'm telling you that I won't be easy to work for at this level. I know that. I'm not going to pretend the difficulty goes away because we've been through something together. I know that. So you understand what you'd be taking on. I understand what I'd be taking on. He thought about Ethan's drawing again. The figure in the window. The figure on the sidewalk. 2 separate places, same building. I want one condition. She raised an eyebrow. You're in a position to set conditions? You need someone who'll tell you when you're wrong. That only works if I can actually say it, which means I need to know, formally, that saying it won't get me removed the next time it's inconvenient for you to hear. Ariana was quiet for a moment. That's not a condition, she said. That's the job description. Then I'll take it. She turned back to her monitors. I'll have Danny process the new contract today. Good. He went back to his desk. After a moment, she said without turning around, The consultation at Eastbridge, Dr. Vance. What's the cost structure on the ongoing monitoring? Insurance covers most of it. There's a gap on the specialist visits. I'm establishing a medical support fund for employees' families, chronic condition management. She was typing. It'll take 3 weeks to set up properly. Tell Danny to flag Ethan's case for the first distribution. Logan looked at the back of her head. Ariana. She kept typing. Don't. I was just going to say thank you. I know. Don't. A beat. It's a company policy. It applies to every employee with a qualifying dependent. You're not special. He understood that the policy applied to every employee with a qualifying dependent because she was building it that way. Because saying this is for your son was a thing she didn't know how to do without it costing her something. So she'd found a way to do it that had a frame around it that was structural, not personal. He understood that, and he didn't press it. Then I'll make sure Danny has the documentation, he said. Good. Detem. 3 weeks after this board meeting, Marcus Hale and 2 of the 3 other executives were formally charged with corporate fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The third had cooperated with the investigation early enough to negotiate a separate agreement. Petra Voss resigned and was served with a civil complaint the same afternoon. The story made the business press, not front page, but visible, the kind of coverage that would follow those names for a long time in certain circles. The all-hands meeting had happened 2 days after the board meeting, on a Thursday morning, in the largest conference space in the building with a video feed to the other 2 offices. Ariana had written every word of it herself. Logan had read the draft once, at her request, and said 2 things, that the 3rd paragraph buried the lead, and that she should cut the last sentence because it apologized in a way that undermined everything the previous sentence had established. She changed the 3rd paragraph and cut the last sentence. When she gave the address, the building was very quiet, in the way that large groups of people are quiet when they're actually listening, not politely, but fully. She told them what had happened, not everything, not the specific chain of documents, not the names that weren't yet public, but the shape of it, and what it meant, and what came next. She said the company had been under a threat that had operated in the dark, and that the threat had been removed, and that the work of the next 6 months was going to be rebuilding trust, internally, with the board, with their clients and partners, and that it was going to be difficult, and some days it was going to feel like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. She said, I built this company because I believe that what we do here matters. Not in an abstract way, in a specific way, in the work you come in and do every day, in the problems you solve for the people who depend on us. That hasn't changed. What changes is how we protect it. And I intend to be very deliberate about that. She didn't say it was going to be fine. She didn't promise outcomes she couldn't guarantee. She said, "This is what happened, this is where we are, and this is how we move." Afterward, Logan stood near the back of the room and watched people talk to each other. The particular way people talk after a leader has said something honest, which is different from the way they talk after a leader has said something inspiring. Less collective, more individual. People processing their own versions of what they'd just heard. Danny appeared at his elbow. "She's good," Danny said quietly, not sycophantically, just as an observation. "She is." "The first month you were here, I thought you'd be gone by day 5. She glanced at him. "I've worked on this floor for 2 years. I've seen a lot of people not make it past week 1. "I know." "What made the difference, for you?" Logan thought about it. About the first morning, the brief on the table, the contract clause in the red folder. About the coffee cup on his desk that one Monday. About a hospital corridor and a phone call, and the 3 words, "Go get your son." "I needed the job," he said, "and she needed something that wasn't sympathy." He paused. Turned out those 2 things were compatible. Danny considered this. "That's either the simplest or the most complicated answer I've ever heard." "Probably both," Chad. It was a Wednesday evening, 6 weeks after the board meeting, when Logan stayed late to finish a restructuring brief Ariana had asked for by end of week. She was on the other side of the office, working through something on her own. She'd stopped explaining what she was working on in the evenings because he'd stopped needing her to. Because he could read the shape of her focus by now the way you learn to read any space you spend enough time in. Around 7:30, she said, "You've been quiet all day." "I'm usually quiet." "You're usually productively quiet. Today you've been thinking about something quiet." He looked over at her. She wasn't looking at him. She was still looking at her screen, but she had that listening posture, the one where her attention was distributed and some of it was on the room. "Ethan started at the new school today," he said. "Transferred?" "The district has a program for kids with medical needs. Better infrastructure for managing episodes. It's a longer commute, but..." He stopped. "He called me at lunch from the school nurse's office. Not because anything was wrong, just because it was his first day somewhere new and he wanted to check in." Ariana was quiet for a moment. "What did he say?" "He said the art teacher has a gecko." Logan looked at his screen. "He said it's the best school he's ever been to." A silence. "He's easy to make happy," Ariana said. Sometimes he's the least easy person I know." "That tracks." She turned a page in whatever she was reading. "He sounds like someone worth knowing." Logan looked at the brief on his screen. "He is." The office was quiet after that. Not empty quiet, but the kind of quiet that 2 people make when they're working in the same space and the space has gotten comfortable enough that they've stopped filling it with noise. Outside the windows, the city was moving into evening. Somewhere across town, Ethan was at Mrs. Chu's, probably drawing something. Somewhere in a law firm office, Mira Cheng was building a fraud case that would take another 6 months to fully prosecute. And somewhere in a boardroom that had been recently emptied of its most dangerous occupant, a new set of senior leaders was being vetted, slowly, carefully, by a CEO who had learned something expensive about the cost of trusting tenure over examination. Logan finished the brief at 8:12. He sent it to Ariana's inbox and began closing down his workstation. "Good?" she asked, without looking up. She'd heard the send. "It's what you asked for. Whether it's good depends on what you do with it." She read it. He was still packing his bag when she said, "It's good." He zipped the bag. "I'll see you tomorrow." 7:45. "I'll be here." He picked up his jacket and walked to the door. His hand was on the handle when she said quietly, with the particular flatness she used for things that cost her something to say, "Logan?" He turned. She was still looking at her screen. "I know you didn't come here for this. Any of this." A pause. "I want you to know that I'm aware of that." He stood there for a moment holding his jacket. "I didn't come here for it," he said, "but I'm not sorry it happened." She said nothing, but she didn't look away from the screen in the way she looked away from things she was dismissing. She looked away from it in the other way, the way that meant she was keeping something steady. He went home to his son. The building hummed behind him, 32 floors of people and work, and the ordinary machinery of a company finding its way back to something it recognized as itself. It was not fixed. It was not resolved in the way that things get resolved in stories that want to wrap cleanly. There were still lawyers and depositions and board relationships that needed rebuilding, and a communications department that was running with half its leadership and 400 people who were doing their best work in the middle of uncertainty. But it was moving in the right direction. And on the 32nd floor, Ariana Sterling kept working, the way she always had, alone but less defended, in a city that had no idea how close it had come to losing something that mattered. And for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't running the night shift entirely by herself. 6 months is long enough to see whether something is real, not in the way that first weeks are real. The intensity of crisis, the compression of trust under pressure, two people thrown together by circumstances that didn't give them the option of being cautious. That kind of real is its own thing, and it doesn't always survive the ordinary. What survives the ordinary is different, quieter, built from the accumulation of unremarkable days, the small decisions made when nothing dramatic is happening, the way someone treats you when there's no audience and no crisis, and no reason to be anything other than exactly what they are. 6 months in, Logan Hayes understood something about Ariana Sterling that no resume or reputation or business profile had ever captured. She was not someone who had been hardened by difficulty. She was someone who had learned very early and very completely that the cost of being seen was too high to pay casually. The wheelchair was part of it, but only part. The accident had accelerated something that was already happening, a kind of inner fortification, a decision made somewhere below the level of language that the world was safer when you didn't need it. What 6 months had done, slowly and without ceremony, was complicate that decision, not undo it. You don't undo something that deep in 6 months or possibly ever, but complicate it, put cracks in it, let some light through, create a few places where the fortification had quietly lowered because maintaining it required energy she was spending on something else. Logan noticed these places. He didn't point at them. That, he had come to understand, was the whole job. The fraud case against Hale and his associates resolved in the 9th month, 3 months after the events that most people inside Sterling Technologies had taken to calling, with characteristic understatement, the restructuring. The resolution was not a courtroom verdict. It was a negotiated settlement, the kind where the specifics were sealed but the outcome was not. Hale and the senior VP of Finance surrendered their equity stakes, paid restitution, and accepted permanent bars from serving as officers or directors of any public company. The third executive, the one who had cooperated, received a reduced civil judgment. Petra Voss settled separately for a figure that Mira Cheng described as meaningful without specifying the number, and the consulting firm that had built the acquisition prospectus quietly dissolved its corporate entity and reincorporated under a different name, which was the kind of thing that happened when lawyers got involved, and everyone decided that the full cost of a trial was not worth the point it would make. It wasn't justice in the absolute sense. Logan had never expected absolute justice. He'd spent enough time watching how institutions processed wrongdoing to know that the gap between what should happen and what does happen is not a malfunction. It's the architecture. But it was enough. The people who had built a quiet machine to take something that didn't belong to them were going to carry that with them. And Sterling Technologies was still standing. Ariana received the news from Mira Cheng on a Thursday morning in her office. Logan was at his desk when the call came in. He could hear Mira's voice in the way you can hear someone through a closed door. Not the words, just the cadence. And he kept working, because that was what he did. He gave her the room she needed to process things in private. When the call ended, there was silence. Then Ariana said, "Logan." He came to the door of her office. She was looking at the window. The city was doing its morning thing, ordinary, continuous, carrying no specific weight. "It's done," she said. I heard the tone of Mira's voice. She was quiet for a moment. He waited because by now he knew that her silences had different qualities, and this one was the kind that needed to finish itself. "I keep thinking about what I would have done if you hadn't read that folder," she said. "The Reyes contract. If you'd seen it and decided it wasn't your business and set it back down." "I thought about that," Logan said. "I almost did." She turned from the window. "What made you say something?" He thought about it honestly.
I needed the job to keep working, and the job was you. If something brought you down, I was back to zero, so it was practical. She looked at him with the particular steady attention she brought to things that were true but incomplete. That's the first reason. The second reason is that it was wrong. What they were doing.
And I was the only person in the room who could see it at that moment. He paused. I don't think you can see something like that and put it back down. Not if you're a certain kind of person. What kind of person? The inconvenient kind. Something moved across her face, that ghost of a thing, the almost laugh that appeared so rarely and so briefly that he'd started treating each one like a small event. Yes, she said. That's exactly what you are. She turned back to the window. I'm going to announce the settlement to the board this afternoon. I want a full company communication drafted by noon, not the legal version, the human version. I want people to understand that it's over. I'll have it to you by 11. Good. A pause. And I want to do something else. He waited. The medical support fund. I want to expand it. Not just chronic condition management. I want to cover acute care gaps, specialist referrals, mental health. I want it structured as a permanent benefit, not a discretionary fund, something with real teeth. That's a significant budget commitment. I know what it is. She said it the way she said things she'd already decided. We had 412 employees when Hale started building his case against me. We have 431 now. We grew in the middle of all of it. Those people came here or stayed here while the company was navigating the worst internal crisis of its existence, and most of them didn't even know what was happening. They just kept doing their jobs. She paused. They deserve a company that keeps doing its job by them. Logan thought about Ethan's first appointment at Eastbridge, about Dr. Vance saying the goal is to get him to a place where this is a part of his life he manages, not a crisis he responds to. About how different those two things felt when you were living inside them. I'll start building the framework this week, he said. I want your input on the structure, not just the execution. You have it. She nodded. That was the agreement. Brief, practical, built on the understanding that both of them meant what they said and would follow through on it. He went back to his desk, but he paused at the doorway and said, without turning, For what it's worth, I think it would have come apart eventually regardless, not because of me, because you would have found it. You were already looking. There was a beat. I was looking in the wrong places, she said. I was watching the contracts and the board politics. I wasn't watching the people I trusted. That's not a flaw. That's what trust costs. It costs too much when you lose it, and costs something different when you keep it. He turned briefly. The question is whether the keeping is worth the risk of the losing. I think you've decided it is. She was quiet for a long moment, then simply, yes. He went back to his desk. The full company communication went out at 11:40. It was 6 paragraphs. Ariana had changed 2 of Logan's sentences and added one of her own. A single line near the end that said, without flourish, this company belongs to the people who build it every day. That has always been true. It is more true now than it has ever been. He'd read it and thought it was the best sentence in the document. He didn't tell her that because she already knew. The responses came back within an hour. Not to Ariana's inbox. She'd directed them to a general channel. But Logan saw them because monitoring the general channel was part of his job. They were from people at all levels of the company, from senior developers to the facilities team to a woman in the Portland office who had been there since the first year and who wrote 3 sentences that were so plainly and directly emotional that Logan looked away from his screen for a second and then looked back. He thought about something then, about what it meant to build something and then nearly lose it to something you'd built into it without knowing. About what it meant to have 400 people go on doing their jobs while the floor was shifting beneath them. About the particular kind of courage that isn't dramatic, that doesn't announce itself or get documented, but just keeps showing up. There is a version of this story that gets told as a triumph. And it is a version of this story, but it is not the whole version. The whole version is also about all the ways it almost didn't go that way. About the modified contract that Logan almost didn't mention. About the investor presentation that Ariana almost didn't recover. About the board meeting where the margin between enough evidence and not enough was a matter of weeks, maybe days. About all the small decisions made by imperfect people under circumstances that didn't offer clean choices, and how those decisions, accumulated, added up to something that held. That's not a lesson that comes with a bow on it. It's just what the story was actually made of. Ethan's 3-month monitoring appointment with Dr. Vance fell on a Friday, which was fortunate because Fridays were the one day Logan had built in enough schedule flex to leave at 3 without it cascading into the rest of the week. He picked Ethan up from school at 2:40, and Ethan was characteristically philosophical about the appointment in the way he'd gotten philosophical about the medical routine. Not resigned, just matter of fact, treating it the way you treat something that's part of your life and not the whole of it. "Will it hurt?" Ethan asked in the car. "The spirometry?" "No, it's just blowing into a tube." "What about the blood draw?" "Small pinch. Ethan looked out the window. "I hate small pinches."
I know. They always say small pinch and it's medium-sized. That is medically inaccurate, but emotionally accurate. Ethan considered this. "Dad?" "Yeah? Are you happy? At your job?" Logan glanced in the rearview mirror. Ethan was still looking out the window, asking in the way he asked things he actually wanted to know, which was without direct eye contact, as if the question needed some room around it. "Yeah," Logan said. "I am. Even though it's hard?" "Especially because it's hard." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Mom used to say that." Logan kept his eyes on the road. "She did. She said easy things don't teach you anything." "She was right about most things." "She was right about everything," Ethan said with absolute conviction. Then, "Except the time she said rain was good for your hair. I looked it up and rain is actually bad for your hair because of the pollution." Logan made a sound that was a real laugh, which surprised him slightly. "Fair enough." Ethan smiled at the window. A small smile, private, the kind a kid makes when they've made their parent laugh and they know it. They rode the rest of the way in the particular comfortable quiet of two people who know each other very well. Dr. Vance reviewed the monitoring data on a large screen in his office, walking Logan through the graphs with the same quality of directness that Logan had appreciated in every previous appointment. "The inflammation markers are significantly improved," Vance said. "The new protocol is working. His peak flow scores over the past 8 weeks are consistently in the green zone. Not just at the high end of acceptable, but genuinely good. The episode frequency? 1 minor event in 12 weeks, managed successfully with the rescue protocol. That's a major improvement from where he was before." Vance looked up from the screen. "He's not out of the woods in the sense that this doesn't go away, but he's in a much more stable position than he was 6 months ago. The goal now is maintenance and continued monitoring, not active management of a deteriorating condition." Logan nodded. He was writing in the small notebook again. "The school's been helpful?" Vance asked. "Very. They have a nurse on staff who knows the protocol. Ethan's comfortable there." "Good. Comfort matters more than people realize with kids this age. Anxiety about an episode can trigger one." Vance closed the file. "You've done well with this, Mr. Hayes. A lot of parents come in managing from behind. You've been staying ahead of it." "I've had some help," Vance smiled slightly. "The referral to us. That and other things." On the drive back, Ethan was in a good mood the way he got after medical appointments that went well. A specific brightness, a kind of quiet relief he didn't name, but that Logan could read from the back of his head. "Dr. Vance said I'm doing really well," Ethan said. "He did. He said the green zone. He said consistently in the green zone. That means it's not luck. It's the work you've been doing. And the medication. And the medication." Ethan swung his feet against the car seat in a gentle rhythm. "Dad, do you think your boss will ever meet me?" Logan thought about that. It was not something he had considered in any concrete way. The two worlds had been adjacent for months, Ethan knowing Ariana existed from Logan's descriptions, Ariana knowing Ethan existed from the medical fund and the occasional logistical reality of a single-parent schedule, but the two of them occupying separate spaces that Logan had kept separate. "Someday, maybe," he said. "Why?" "Because she helped me. The hospital thing. The doctors." Ethan was still looking out the window. "I think you should thank people when they help you, even if they say not to." Logan looked at the road. "She did say not to."
I know, you told me. A pause. But that's just because she doesn't know how to take it. That doesn't mean she doesn't want to hear it. 8 years old, sometimes appallingly perceptive. I'll think about it, Logan said. He thought about it for 2 weeks. What he landed on was not a thank you, not a formal one, not a thing that would make her uncomfortable, not something that required her to receive something she didn't know what to do with. What he landed on was a Friday afternoon in early spring, when the company had just closed its first major client partnership of the new fiscal year. A deal that had taken 4 months to negotiate and represented the clearest signal yet that the company's reputation had not just survived the crisis, but sharpened through it. The office was lighter that Friday than most Fridays. Not a party. Ariana didn't do parties, and the culture of the floor didn't do spontaneous celebration in the way that some offices do. But there was a quality in the air, in the conversations that filtered through from the floors below, in the way the team moved through the afternoon that was different, like something that had been held at a particular tension for a long time had been allowed to ease. Ariana was at her desk at 5:15 when Logan came in and set a piece of paper on the edge of her desk. She looked at it. It was a drawing. Pencil on lined school paper, the kind from a spiral notebook. A building with many windows. At the top, in one window, a figure in a wheelchair. On the sidewalk below, a figure carrying a bag. And in the corner of the building added in what was clearly a second pass, a small detail that hadn't been in the original, a tiny figure on the sidewalk next to the man with the bag. Small. Looking up at the building. Ariana looked at it for a long moment. Ethan made it for you, Logan said. He updated the original. He said you should have the copy because you're in it. She didn't say anything. He also said to tell you that he knows you didn't want to be thanked, but that he's 8, and those rules don't apply to him yet. There was a silence. The long, particular kind. He sounds difficult, Ariana said. Her voice was even, but something in it was not entirely steady, and she didn't try very hard to hide that. He really is, Logan said. She picked up the drawing, held it. She looked at it the way people look at something that has arrived unexpectedly from a direction they weren't watching and landed somewhere they didn't know was open. Tell him I said thank you, she said finally. I will. She set the drawing on the corner of her desk. Not in a drawer, not to the side. In the corner, propped at an angle where she could see it. Logan noted this and said nothing. Monday, she said, returning to her screen. I want to go over the Q2 strategic plan. Full day, no interruptions. I'll block it. And there's a new analyst starting in the data team, Caldwell's recommendation. I want your read on her before the end of her first week. I'll have it. Good. She was typing again, the ordinary rhythm of a Friday late afternoon. You can go. He picked up his jacket. He was at the door when she said, and it was the quality of the saying, the specific register, the thing she'd gotten slightly better at over months of practice and was still not entirely comfortable with. This quarter was good. The team did good work. He turned. She was still looking at her screen, but she'd said it. The thing she found difficult to say, she'd said. They did, he said. So did you. She didn't respond, but she didn't deflect it either, which was new and which cost her something he respected. He went home. Spring came to the city the way it always did. Without asking, reorganizing everything. Ethan had a good spring. His episodes stayed rare and manageable. He joined the art club at the new school, which had been his idea and which Logan had agreed to with the kind of instant yes that felt like the easiest decision he'd made in years. He made 2 friends, a boy named Omar, who was obsessed with mathematics, and a girl named Bia, who drew elaborate fantasy maps, and who recognized Ethan's talent for drawing with the directness of another child who took the thing seriously. Logan watched his son become more himself, which is the particular unearned joy of parenting when it's going right, when the person your child is becoming is someone you genuinely want to know. He wasn't naive about it. He knew that Ethan carried his mother's absence the way all children carry losses, not always visibly, but structurally in the shape of how he attached to people, in the slightly old quality of his attention. That wasn't going away. But it was sitting differently now, less like weight, more like part of the architecture. At Sterling Technologies, the company rebuilt itself in the way that companies rebuild after a structural crisis. Imperfectly, with wrong turns and overcorrections and moments where the new culture they were trying to build knocked against old habits that were harder to shift than anticipated. The new senior leadership team was better than the previous one in some ways and unproven in others. Two of the new hires were excellent. One was struggling in ways that would require a difficult conversation in the next quarter. The board relationships were repaired to varying degrees. Caldwell was a genuine partner now, someone Ariana consulted and pushed back on and listened to in the way she hadn't listened to the board before. Others were cordial and functional, without being much more than that. Ariana was different in ways she would have denied and that Logan could see clearly. She still ran the company with the same precision, the same pace, the same absolute intolerance for vagueness or wasted time. She still changed the schedule at inconvenient moments and expected the downstream effects to be managed without complaint. She still caught every mistake, noted it, and held it in the ongoing internal case file she kept on everyone who worked for her, including Logan, including herself. But she also now occasionally said I was wrong about that in a tone that was not performing humility, but simply stating a fact. She asked questions more, not rhetorical questions, real ones, the kind that expected a real answer, and not just confirmation of the position she'd already taken. She had, on two separate occasions, changed a major decision based on Logan's pushback, and on one of those occasions she had told him afterward, without preamble, that he'd been right. She still didn't do warm. But she did something that was in some ways more valuable than warmth. She did honest. She did consistent. She did I said I would, and I did. That's not nothing. In Logan's experience, which was the experience of someone who had lost a person he loved, who had been laid off twice by institutions he'd trusted, who had spent 3 years being the only adult in his household in the way that is both ordinary and privately exhausting. In his experience, I said I would, and I did, was worth more than most people understood until they'd spent real time around its absence. The company's annual review came in late spring. It was the first full fiscal year since the restructuring, the first one that could be read as a genuine measure of the company's health rather than a document of crisis and recovery. The numbers were good, not spectacular, but genuinely good, in the way that means the fundamentals are solid and the trajectory is real. Ariana presented it to the board on a Tuesday morning that was overcast and ordinary. Logan sat along the wall in the same position he'd sat in 9 months ago, when Ariana had stood at the head of a different kind of meeting and used a set of documents that he'd built in the margins of a job that was supposed to be simpler than it turned out to be. The presentation lasted an hour and 10 minutes. The board asked good questions and got direct answers. At the end of it, Caldwell said, "This is what we should have been building all along." And it was the kind of statement that was simultaneously obvious and meaningful in a way that made the room go briefly quiet. After the board members left, Ariana sat at the end of the table. Logan began gathering his materials. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She was looking at the table, at the cleared surface, the empty chairs, the window with the city in it that was the same city it had always been. "I've been thinking about something," she said. He waited. "When I hired you, the second week, when I realized you'd seen the Reyes contract, I thought about letting you go." She said it the way she said honest things, directly, without apparent concern for how it landed. "I thought the risk of someone inside the situation was worse than the risk of handling it alone. I almost talked myself into it." "I wondered if you had." "What changed my mind was that you'd already decided it wasn't only your business. You said you'd help me, and you meant it, and I knew you meant it. And I was not in a position to be strategic about the kind of person who means what they say." She looked up from the table. "I want you to know that, because I'm not sure I've said it." Logan looked at her. "No, you haven't. I'm saying it now." He nodded once. "I hear you." She held his gaze for a moment, then turned to gather her own documents. "Q2 starts next Monday. I need the client expansion strategy by Wednesday. You'll have it Tuesday." "Good." She paused. "Ethan's spring break is next week." He looked at her. She was still gathering papers. "It is." "Mrs. Chu is available?" "I haven't checked." "Check. And if she's not, the building's family care program has a subsidized option. I had Danny set it up last quarter." A pause. "It's not charity. It's a benefit." He looked at the side of her face.
The precise, careful face of someone who had learned to give things without making them into a moment. "I know what it is," he said. "Then use it." She finished gathering her papers and wheeled herself toward the door. He held it open, not because she needed it, but because he was closer to the door, which was the only reason he ever held it. She went through without comment, which was the right response. In the corridor, she said, without stopping, "The drawing is still on my desk." He didn't say anything. "In case you were wondering, I wasn't," he said, which was a lie, and she probably knew it was a lie. And she kept moving down the corridor with the particular efficient pace that was just her pace, the pace that was always going somewhere and didn't perform at going somewhere. He watched her go. The hallway was the same hallway it had always been. Same carpet, same off-white walls, same photograph of the city near the reception desk that he'd stopped really seeing weeks ago because it had become part of the background of a place where he belonged. He thought about Pete downstairs, about that first morning, the security guard leaning back in his chair with the expression of someone who had watched the scene too many times. Most people eat something before they go back downstairs. And Logan saying, "I don't really stress eat." He thought about what he'd known then versus what he knew now, and how you can't build the second thing without going through the first. How there is no version of arriving at trust that doesn't pass through the territory of not knowing yet whether it's safe to trust. How the willingness to walk into that territory, not because you're brave, but because you need something on the other side of it, is sometimes the whole thing. Sometimes that's what distinguishes the people who stay from the people who leave. Not talent, not immunity to difficulty, just the willingness to still be there when the difficult thing is over, which turns out to be rarer than it should be. He didn't think of himself as a remarkable person. He was an operations manager who'd been laid off twice and who made soup from scratch on Sunday nights because it was cheaper than buying it, and Ethan liked it, and it was one of the small anchors of a week that needed anchoring. He was a father who did a better job some days than others. He was someone who had walked into an impossible job for the most practical reason in the world and stayed for reasons that had accumulated so gradually he hadn't noticed them becoming something he'd choose. But here was what he'd learned. In 6 months of working alongside a woman who had spent years building walls against the specific pain of needing people and being let down by them. The strongest thing in any room is not the person who needs nothing. It's the person who needs something and shows up anyway, who keeps the appointment, who tells you the truth about the contract even when it would have been easier to set it back down, who goes to get their son and comes back. Ariana Sterling had needed to stop fighting alone, and she'd spent years not letting herself stop, because stopping felt like losing. What she'd found, what they'd built, without calling it that, in the accumulated days of an arrangement that had never been simple, was something that made stopping possible without it being surrender. A different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't require you to need nothing, the kind that is made, slowly and imperfectly, from deciding that someone is worth trusting with the weight of what you're carrying. She'd told him once, early on, that longevity wasn't the same as loyalty. She was right. But the reverse was also true. And she'd had to live through learning it. Loyalty, when you found it, was worth every cost of the finding. The last thing that happened on that ordinary Tuesday in late spring was small. Logan was at his desk at 4:50 when Ethan called, which happened sometimes, on days when Mrs. Chu picked him up and he had an hour before Logan got home, and he wanted to report something. "Dad? Hey, bud? Everything okay?" "Yeah, I just wanted to tell you something." "What?" "Omar's mom asked who my dad's boss was today. Because Omar's mom works downtown and she knows about the Sterling Technologies stuff, the thing that happened." Logan set down his pen. "What did you say?" "I said she was really smart and she's in a wheelchair, and she's not mean, she's just direct." A pause. "Was that okay?" He looked at the glass door to Ariana's office. Through the frosted panel, the familiar still shape of her at her desk, always at her desk, always working. "That was exactly right," he said. "Omar's mom said she sounded impressive." "She is. I told her she had my drawing," Ethan said. There was something pleased in his voice, not boastful, just satisfied. The specific satisfaction of someone who has given something and knows it landed right. "I think that's cool, that someone impressive has my drawing." Logan looked at the glass door. "Yeah," he said.
I think it's pretty cool too. Okay, Ethan said. See you at home. Mrs. Chu made something with noodles. Save me some. I'll try. The line went quiet. Logan put his phone down and looked at his screen, at the open document that was the Q2 expansion strategy, at the city in the window behind it, at the ordinary late afternoon light falling through the glass onto the dark charcoal carpet of the 32nd floor of a building in a city that had no memory of what had happened here and no particular interest in the answer to the question of what had made the difference. But the answer existed. It wasn't the evidence. It wasn't the encrypted folder, or the timeline, or the board meeting, or any single moment of revelation. Those were the events. The answer was something smaller and harder to name. It was the aggregate of two people choosing, repeatedly, without fanfare, to tell each other the truth and show up the next morning. That's it. That's the whole of it. Most of the important things are like that in Logan's experience. They look like events from the outside, but from the inside, they're just a series of mornings where someone decided to come back. He went back to the document. Outside the glass door, Ariana was still working. He had a meeting with her in 10 minutes about Q2, about the future, about the next set of problems that neither of them could fully anticipate yet, but that would arrive as all problems arrive, without announcement, already in motion. He was ready. She was ready. That, as it turned out, was enough.